we have a good amount to talk about today, but it's a pretty laser-focused demonstration. We're talking about Viveza, and we are specifically going to go in depth talking about control points. Invariably, people have more questions about control points. I'm going to try and cover as much as I can, discussing what they are, how you use them, how you group them together, and so on and so forth. And yeah, it's going to be a good time. So I'll talk for 45 minutes or so, and then we'll go from there. Let's see. So we've got, this is what we're talking about. I should mention that, getting control over color and light using Viveza, knowing what each filter or slider does within the software, grouping control points, and then we'll talk a little bit about why you don't necessarily need really complicated masking techniques. You can basically use control points in most situations for controlling light and color. We're going to be launching the software from Photolab today, and then also from Photoshop. Now, if you're a Lightroom user, the software is going to look and work and react almost the same way as it does here within Photolab. And it's almost exactly the same as the Photoshop version as well. There's just a couple subtle little differences, and there are some workflow differences between Photoshop compared to using Photolab or Lightroom. So we've got our image. Usually what I would recommend that you do is utilize your raw processor to get the image to look the way you want it to before going into any of the Nik plugins. I've actually purposefully left this image a little more raw, if you will, so that we can kind of talk about and discuss and use the software a little bit more in depth. So what we're going to do is move to the Nik collection button here in the lower right-ish quadrant of Photolab, and click the Nik collection button. Before I go into Viveza 2, because in the last webinar that I was in, I was actually messing around with the settings quite a bit. I just want to check my settings to make sure that it's set up the way that we want it to be. So I'm going to click the settings button. This actually looks okay. And the thing that I'm most concerned with is the fact that I'm dealing with a TIFF file, and then that it's 16-bit per channel. So there's a lot of options here, and there are different reasons why you might do different things, but to get the highest quality yield from the adjustments that you make, I recommend that you use a 16-bit per channel workflow with the TIFF file format. Now, right now, the image is going to be resized to be 3000 pixels by long edge. We don't need that, so I'm going to go ahead and just click this little blue box, checkbox off. We don't need it to be resized necessarily for this demonstration. And I'm going to leave my ICC profile sRGB. There are different reasons as to why you might change this. If your main directive when you're doing adjustments, making adjustments to your photos, is to end up putting your image up on the web somewhere, you basically will just want to stick with sRGB for the most part. So that's what we're going to run with right now. So I'm going to click the OK button. I'm going to click Viveza 2 when we're back here in the plugin selector. The software is going to launch, and actually as it does that, what's going to happen is our raw file that's down here in our film strip is going to be duplicated into that 16-bit per channel TIFF file that we were just talking about. And so in this way, we're working in a non-destructive process, which is definitely the way to go if you can help that, if you can make that work. Another way to work in a non-destructive workflow and process here within Photolab, and then also utilizing this software from Lightroom, is to use this little checkbox in the lower right corner. In fact, my Viveza is bouncing at me. Yep, and that's why. So as I launch the software, it understands that we're dealing with TIFF files, which is just the file format for anyone maybe not super familiar with that. And what it's letting us know is that we can utilize the Nik plugins in a non-destructive manner, which means once we've done all of our work here, we can actually open the image back up into Viveza 2 after we're done. We come back a day later, a week later, whenever, and we can reprocess the image, and we can replace control points or whatever adjustments we've made within the Nik plugin. So this is a really nice option here. It's actually brand new within the newest version of the Nik collection. So I'm going to click the OK button. To make sure to enable the save and edit later option that we're talking about, you want to move into the lower right corner. There's this little checkbox, and you just simply click that on, and it's going to give you access to the save and edit later option. So We're going to talk about the adjustments and views and tools that are in the interface itself. Before we do that though, let's just make a couple of adjustments. So if you follow me to the right side of the interface, I'm going to actually collapse some of my sliders here, because the first time you launch the software, it's probably going to look like this. So you'll have the word global, which means any adjustment that we make to our photo is going to adjust everything, right? So if I were to take my brightness slider up or down, what it's doing is it's adjusting the global image. When we start to use control points in the next few minutes, this word right here on the right side is going to switch from global to selective. And that's going to inform us that we have an active control point, and then the sliders are going to be active based upon that control point. And I'll show you that. Right now, I've collapsed our sliders. If I wanted to open them up so that we can go past the brightness, contrast, saturation, and structure sliders, go into different color adjustment tools and blacks adjustment or shadow adjustment, we can click the expand all sliders button here, or the nice shortcut, you can tap E on your keyboard. By the way, on the DxO service or help website, there's actually a whole list of all of the different shortcuts for each of the individual NIC plugins. So if you're interested in learning those things, you can access them through the help portion of the DxO NIC software website. So I've clicked expand, and now we've expanded past structure. So you've got brightness, contrast, saturation, structure. We'll talk about these. Shadow adjustments, warmth, and then individual colors, red, green, blue, and hue. If I were to slide any of these, like let's say I took this hue slider and I started sliding it to the right, what you'll notice is that it starts adjusting the entire photograph, right? So if I've inverted my hue to 180 degrees, you'll see something quite funky. If I slide it over, into the negative, you're going to see some kind of interesting color applications. It's not highly likely that you'll ever do this on an image with the global adjustment, but you could. It's got a cool adjustment or cool aesthetic to it for sure. But what I'm trying to show you is that when you slide these sliders around, it's going to be adjusting the entire photo. And in fact, what I want to do, I think, is brighten the entire image up, maybe just 5 or 10%. And all I'm doing here is looking at my screen and making sure that it does what I think I want it to do. If I increase the contrast here, I can go and pull that up just a little bit, maybe go to 10 or 12%. And then I'm going to actually adjust my saturation, and we're going to really add a lot of saturation here just so that I can show you a few interface tools and so that you can see the relationship between these different things, basically. I don't think we're going to leave the saturation slider up at 66%. I don't think that's going to be helpful for us. Although one thing that I do like to do in my own workflow is I'll take some of these sliders from time to time and I'll actually slide them all the way over to the right and all the way over to the left. And I like to do that so that I can see what the image looks like, obviously. And then also because I'm going to be able to target different parts of the image using control points. So I might decide that, 55% saturation actually looks really nice back here in the background where there's a whole lot of haze. It's maybe too much on the rock face right here, and it's probably too much in the foreground, in the front of the photograph here. But back here, 55% works well. So as I make that global adjustment, that I'm not going to leave there anyways, I can kind of understand maybe the direction that I'm going to go when I start targeting the different parts of the photograph to direct your attention, right? And with the beauty of using these control points is I can control the attention of whoever's looking at the picture by some subtle rules, basically. We'll talk about those as well. So I've increased saturation. I'm going to increase structure as well. Structure is basically a texture adjustment. As I bring the slider up and to the right, this is way too much. What we get out of it is this fine texture detail is being brought out. And it's an algorithm and tool. In this case, it's specific to the NIC plugins. You'll actually find the structure slider in a lot of other NIC plugins. And then you could, I kind of relate this to a mixture between clarity and the texture tool within within the Adobe suite, within the Adobe raw processing tool. And actually, it's kind of like dehaze as well in a way, right? It kind of does that too. It all wrapped up and rolled into one nice adjustment. Again, we're not going to leave these adjustments this sort of strong, but if you follow me into the upper left corner, I just want to quickly go over how to change these views here. Right now, we're on the single image view, and if I click this little checkbox off, you'll see the before, and if I click the checkbox back on, you'll see the after. One thing that happens to me from time to time is I'll click this preview checkbox off just because I'm looking at the before and after, and then I'll go over to one of the sliders and I'll start making adjustments and nothing happens. And I'm like, well, what's going on here? You know, is it frozen? Did I break something? No, I just forgot to click this preview checkbox back on. So that's one thing that you do want to be careful of while you're here within Viveza 2, if you're using that single image view and the preview checkbox. Two other views that you have here are the split preview. So as you click on the split preview in that upper left corner, on the left side, you're going to have the original image. You're going to have this red line that cuts the image right down the middle. And on the right side of that red line, you're going to have the enhanced image or whatever you've done to the photograph so far. You can click on that red line and you can drag it back and forth. This is a really nice way to kind of target and just look at sections of an image as well, sort of like a before and after, to make sure what's happening in the image is what you want to happen in the image and in different parts of the photo. The last preview up in the upper left corner is a side-by-side preview. As I've clicked on it, on top is the original image, on the bottom is the enhanced. If I click on this little twirler here in between the two images, now on the left is the original and on the right is the enhanced image. I'm going to click the button that's in the upper right corner here. That's just going to hide the tools palette. And the reason you might want to do that is to just give your image a little more screen space, right? A little more real estate to be able to see what the photo looks like with a before and after. And that's kind of nice. And in fact, if you go to your single image view and you've tabbed, and click the tab button or tap the tab button like that, or clicked on the button that we did click on, you just get a nice large representation of your image. That can be really handy in a lot of situations. I'm going to leave brightness where it is. I'm going to leave contrast where it is. I do want a little bit of a saturation and structure adjustment globally on the photo, but I don't want it to be this high. So you can actually change these sliders a couple different ways. You can double click on the slider, and that's going to home the slider, gets it back to its default setting. You can actually click on the slider and drag it back and forth. That's what we've been doing so far. Or if you have a specific number that you want to dial in, you can actually click on the number and then just tap it in as you see fit. So maybe I want 12% structure on the entire photo. I can click that and tab it, or sorry, click it and type it in, and I'm going to get my 12% saturation. So that's global adjustments for the most part. A couple things that I also should point out here is the levels and curves adjustment tool. So if you follow me and scroll down to the bottom portion of the right side of the interface here, you have a level and curve tool. And in the level and curve adjustment, you have the ability to change the RGB channels altogether or the individual color channels. And so one might change the individual color channel if there was a stylistic effect that you wanted to go after. Like I could maybe cool the shadows down and I could warm the highlights, because what I've done is I've clicked on my blue color channel and now I'm basically adjusting the curve so that now I have warmer highlights, brighter values, and cooler shadow areas. And this kind of can give you this maybe film aesthetic if that's something you're after. Although personally, I think if I were to do that, I would probably do it with Color Effects Pro because A, I can save a preset, in Color Effects Pro with whatever filters I want to use, and B, there are filters that are specifically designed to do that. But the levels and curves is a nice option to have here, especially for anyone who might be scanning film. Having a level and curve is just a nice option in any regard, but definitely when dealing with scanned film, which, by the way, any of the Nik plugins will accept an image file format that's from scanners, so TIFF files, JPEGs, and so on. All right, so we've talked about the global adjustments. We've gotten into our levels and curves. Let's just jump into control points. And so what we're going to do here, I'm not going to explain the control points on this image so much as just make some adjustments really quickly so you can see how fast the adjustments can be made. And I'm going to just basically try to direct your attention as the viewer through the image so that you get a nice, pleasant experience, and so that I'm controlling your attention through the image, kind of telling you what's important based upon how bright or how dark something is. So what I'm doing right now is duplicating the control points. And again, I'm going to cover all of this. I'm just working kind of fast here. So all 4 of these control points are exact duplicates. And what they're doing is they're darkening down the sky. They're adding a little contrast, adjusting the saturation, and increasing structure. I'm going to do something sort of the opposite down in the bottom portion of the image. I'm actually going to maybe increase contrast down here, but I'm going to darken the overall values just a touch. And what my goal is here is to kind of attract your eye as the viewer in towards the middle of the image, more so than the outsides of the photograph. So by placing control points, I'm able to very selectively dodge and burn, and also adjust color. So dodging and burning, if I wanted to lighten an area, that would be referred to as dodging the area of the image. And if I wanted to burn an area down, that's basically darkening the photograph. So let's see, saturation, structure, that's too much saturation, I think. And basically the way that you're going to direct the viewer's attention through an image is the viewer's eye is going to be attracted to the brightest stuff in an image, the most contrasty stuff in the image, and the most colorful stuff in the photograph. And in this case, because there's no human face or human form, those rules all kind of ring true. As soon as you throw a human into the mix, your eye is going to generally be attracted to the human form or the human face first, along with, you know, the brightest stuff in the image, the most saturated stuff, and the most contrasty things. So if I don't want you to look at a portion of the photograph, I darken it and I reduce the contrast, right? So over here on the left side, I don't want you to look at this so much. I want you to push your attention towards the middle. So I'm just going to go ahead and darken down the left side of the image a little bit. And then if I want to attract your eye in towards this section, I'm going to add a control point. You'll note I'm just sort of throwing control points everywhere. We are going to discuss, you know, kind of why I'm doing that on the next few images. But the shortcut for creating a control point is Shift-Command-A. So I can either click on the Add Control Point button in the upper right corner, and that's going to give me a little crosshair for dropping a new control point, or I can hit Shift-Command-A on a Mac, or that would be Shift-Control-A on a PC, and that's going to give me a crosshair, and I'm able to place my control points wherever we want to place them. So let's darken this down just a little bit, just to add a sense of contrast into the center of the image. And then what we're going to do is just take a look at the before and after. So let's look at the side by side. I'm going to hide this stuff. And I've made, you know, relatively subtle adjustments to the photo, but I'm thinking your eye is probably directed a little bit more towards the right. Like if you lean back in your chair and you kind of look at both photos at the same time, your eye is probably going to lend itself towards the right image, because we've controlled the different contrast and color areas in the image. And so that should pull your eye towards those portions of the photograph. So let's talk about this stuff. I'm going to click the Save button in the lower right corner of the interface, and we're going to move on with our image. We're going to go into another test photograph and discuss how the control points are making their selections, and then we're going to go in depth into all of the things that I just did. So let's click Save. It'll take it a second to process that image out, because what's happening is the TIFF file is going to get saved with the metadata, the information to be able to open the image back up and re-edit the photo. Okay, so we've got our raw file, and then right next to it, we have our enhanced file. So I click on that, and we should see our preview. All right. So we're going to go into this sort of non-photo image so that we can talk about what control points are doing a little bit more, and then we'll jump over into Photoshop, and I'll show you how to access the software from Photoshop, as well as more things pertaining to control points and Viveza. So I've clicked on the Nick Collection button in the lower right corner in case you missed it, and I'm just going to go ahead and click on Viveza 2. The settings that we set up last time, they're sticky, so I should be able to just open into Viveza, and it will have the same settings as it did last time. That's when we open it up. Now, once you learn what this is saying, telling you that this is a TIFF file and we're working in a non-destructive process, you can actually click the Do Not Show Again checkbox and then click OK. And this prompt isn't going to pop up every single time because you'll know the process. I don't turn mine off because we're doing these webinars all the time. So it pops up every time I launch the image, just so you know how to, I guess, work the interface a little bit better. All right, so the control points are actually going to be able to make really nice selections of most of the things in this image, because what they're doing is when you place a control point on an object, so if I've clicked the Add Control Point button on the right side, I'm going to go ahead and just place a control point on this circle here. Actually, let's move it over to the star, right? And I'm going to move it over to the star to show you that we're not making a circular selection. We're just making a selection of what you've placed the point on with this control point. And the control point does that by looking at the tone, color, and textures, looking for edges of the object that you've placed the point on, and then it's also governed by the size of the area that you've placed it on. And you can think of the size, or that circle that's going around the control point, as the area of influence, and the bigger I make it, kind of the higher the tolerance the selection will have. So let's actually look at that. Follow me over to the right side of the interface. We have what's called the control points list. We haven't discussed this yet. And in the control points list, on the far right side, there's a little checkbox. And if you click on that little checkbox, the thing that's being selected by this point is going to be white. The thing that's not selected by the image is not going to be white. And in fact, it's going to be black or gray. Now, if the selection is a little bit gray, right? Like if I move off of one of those objects and we move into the background, that's a gradient, you'll notice this sort of really beautiful fall off and photographic looking selection that the control point is able to make. And this is one of the reasons why you don't necessarily need really complex selective tools, because the control points do it for you. You can basically just place the point on the object and you can see the selection. Like it's easy for the control point to make this selection because the circle here is just one shade of red and it has a finely delineated edge. When we get into things like a gradient, the control point wants to make a photographic looking selection, right? And so if I drag it over into the center of the gradient that's over here, you can see it has this beautiful fall off. As I slide it out to different tones and areas, you can watch as the selection is actually changing. Now, let's turn off the control point. Let's actually put this back over here on our star. Oh, you know what? One thing I didn't show you. Watch what happens. And I'll show you again this stuff when we're on an image, so it'll relate a little bit more. But if you take a control point and you don't encompass the entire object, there'll actually be some fall off, right? So you can see, depending upon where I place the point, most of the top of the star is being selected, but down here at the bottom of the star, it's not really being selected because I've only told the control point to be that big. If I expand this out, now the control point kind of has a better understanding that we want to select out that whole star. And so it literally cuts the thing out for us. It makes a photographic looking selection in situations where that's appropriate, and it makes cutout selections like here in situations where it can and where it needs to. One thing that I'm noticing right now, as I place the point on the star, a little bit of the background looks like it's got some selective adjustment on it as well. If I don't want this control point to affect another area in the image that is being affected, what you can do is just take another control point, place it on the area or object, and then what that's going to do is it's going to kind of smarten up the first control point. In fact, as you add more control points, each control point can target its own object or area, and therefore each control point kind of gets smarter. It understands better what it should be affecting. So if I drag this control point away, you'll again notice that it's sort of dark here, but you can see that a little bit of this area is being affected. As I place this point here, this is called a constrictive control point. So constricting the other control point itself. All right, back into our control points list. Let's just describe what these things are doing for us. First things first, if I click on a control point in my control point list, it activates that point, right? It's highlighted in gold here. And then you can also see the adjustment sliders are now out and ready to be adjusted. If I were to click on control point number 2, it switches. So now we've got control point number 2 activated. If I wanted to turn a control point on and off, like to see a before and after with a particular control point, you can use the little checkbox that's to the left of the label of in the control point list. You'll notice another thing here, there's a little color swatch that's to the left of the label as well. That's just a little indicator to tell you what tone and color that you've placed the point on. And then if you move over to the right from there, you have the size of the area of influence. So control point number 2 is taking up 49% of the image. Now, it's not necessarily selecting 49% of the image, it's just the size of the area that the control point is set to is 49%. If I expand this out, it'll go up to 100%. If I bring it down, you can go down to 1 or 2%. There's a 1% sized control point. And so that's just letting you know that that's not a very big control point, basically. And then obviously far to the right in the control points list, you can turn on or off the actual selection so that you can view it. This is the viewing of it. One last trick, and this will make more sense when we use other control points on other images. If you actually click on this little square button, there's a little square with a circle in it. If you click on that, it'll actually activate all of the control points on the image. And it'll show you the selection being made by all of the control points. I'll point that out again when maybe it makes more sense. Because on this image, we probably wouldn't need to do that. All right, so we've placed our control point on the star. We've encompassed the entire area of the star. If I were to go in and, let's say, desaturate, I could go and remove all of the color, right? And then if I expand that out, now I have a gray star instead of having a blue star. Or if I go and bring this back down and I decide, okay, what would happen if I went into my green slider and I started to increase the green, right? So that's going to darken it. If I go into my red slider, I'm going to go and increase that, and I'm going to remove blue, right? So I can actually dramatically change colors of these objects using the sliders within our specific RGB sliders here, which is a really nice option. This comes down into, like, if you wanted to change the color of someone's t-shirt or the colors of someone's eyes or something like that, you could place a control point on that object and then use the individual color channels to actually skew and change the color, of that particular object. And of course, we messed around with hue earlier. If I were to bring these, let's double click on all of these sliders, the red, green, and blue. And note, this is what we talked about earlier. If you follow me to the right side, now where it said global before, it says selective. No, let me rephrase this. It's on the last image, we were talking about the global adjustment sliders when we were affecting the entire photograph. Now we're dealing with our control points, and so it says selective. And whatever control point is currently active, these sliders on the right side is going to affect, right? So if I go and slide my hue slider over towards red, right, or over into the positive, what we can do is change the color of the hue of that particular object. So now we have a red star and a red circle. Anyways, this is just a nice demo image to start to discuss how the control points are working. I'm going to actually click the cancel button in the lower right corner because we don't need to save that. And we're going to jump over into Photoshop so I can show you how to access the software, and we can discuss a couple other things. So what did we use the stars and circles there. Let's move over into my Jaipur picture. And so we're here in Photoshop. There are two ways to access Viveza 2 from Photoshop. You can move up into the filter drop-down menu in the top portion of your interface, go down to the Nick collection, and then into Viveza 2. Or you can use this handy-dandy Nick Selective tool. So this Nick Selective tool is in my mind, the easier or more sort of ergonomic way of accessing the Nick plugins. I leave this open. Oftentimes I will just minimize so I only see the icons. And at first, you might not be familiar with what all of these are. You'll actually learn the order in Photoshop. So define, Viveza, perspective, and so on. It goes right down the line. And then once you get to know the individual icons, you know that Viveza is the yellow one. So rather than having it open all the time, I can just click on the yellow button here, and that's going to open up Viveza 2. The interface is going to look almost exactly the same as it did within Photolab, as well as what it would look like if we were in Lightroom and launching from Lightroom. The major difference is that down in the lower right corner, we have a brush capability. So if we finish making our edits to our image, and then we want to brush the effect in using the Photoshop brush tool, you can do that clicking the brush button. For anyone familiar with layer masks, basically the tool is just using the layer mask capability that's within Photoshop. So if you're not familiar with layer masks, that's totally cool. You can actually learn kind of how they work by using the brush capability that's in the lower right corner. All right, so let's click on our control points and let's talk about what these control points are doing, right? So I'm going to place a control point in our sky. This was a really hazy day in Jaipur, India, and I need to kind of clean up some of the facets here. I want more pop, I want more direction, I want to control your eye as the viewer, and I want more vivid sky, right? So to do that, I'm going to start by placing the point in the sky here. Let's actually size it to be really small, and let's just look and see what this does as we make these adjustments. I'm going to bring my brightness down. I'm going to actually increase the contrast a little bit. Go into my saturation slider, increase the saturation, and then I'm going to move directly into my blue slider, my individual color sliders, and I'm just going to increase the blue, and actually I'm going to decrease the red, which is going to in turn add cyan, right? In fact, I'm just going to point this out. We don't have to talk in depth about this. If you follow me to the right side here, you've got red, green, and blue, right? If you were to increase red, you'll note now that area in the sky is basically turning sort of pink because of the other colors that are in there. But if I were to remove red, now what's going to happen is I'm going to get a cyan color. And that's because these sliders are working with, or if you will, against the complementary color that it's dealing with. So if I remove red, then I'm adding cyan. If I move into green, green is going to be working with and or against magenta, right? So if I increase or decrease green, now my sky is going to turn magenta or purple in this case because of the other blue color that's in there. And then we don't have to talk in depth about color theory and anything like that, but blue, if you were to increase blue, you're basically removing yellow, right? Or if you decrease blue, you're increasing yellow. All right, so we've placed our point. Let's go ahead and just expand this out. And if I expand too far, the control point starts to go in and adjust a little bit into this building here because it thinks that's what we want it to do. I know that because I saw it, and I know it because if I click on the little checkbox in our control points list, I can see it, right? Anything that's white is being affected completely. Anything that's black, like down in here, really isn't being affected at all. But anything that's a shade of gray is going to have some of the effect on it. I want our entire sky to be affected this way. So what we'll do, I'm going to just turn this off for just a second. I'm going to turn the control point selection off. We're going to duplicate this point and place another one over here. There are a couple ways to do that. You can hold, and the way that I tend to do it is I hold the Option key on my Mac, or Alt if I'm on a PC. While I'm holding the Alt or Option key, you click on the control point. So holding Option, click on the control point and drag. And this is going to drag away a duplicated version of that first control point. So I'll do it again, Option, click, and drag. Another way to do it is to click on the point that you want to duplicate and then hit Command C, Command V on a Mac, or Control V, Control C on a PC. That's going to give you a little crosshair, but the crosshair is going to generate a duplicated control point. And there's another way to do that as well that I don't remember right now, so I will remind myself somehow and let you know. Oh, well, the other way to do it is to actually click the duplicate button on the right side. So if I've activated control point number 2 in the image, I move over into my control point list. If you can't remember those shortcuts for whatever reason, you can actually just click the duplicate button and that will duplicate it for you, and just place the duplicate kind of right next to the original. So we should talk about control point placement. We should talk about grouping these control points. The way that you would group control points here within Viveza 2, there are two ways. You can use a shortcut, or you can use the group button in the upper right corner in the ungroup to ungroup the images, or sorry, ungroup the control points. If you wanted to do that, what you would do is activate multiple control points. So I'm going to click on this first point. I'm going to hold the shift key down on my keyboard, and I'm going to click on all of the other control points that I want to activate. Or if I had sort of free reign here, like I've got all three of these control points, it would be very easy to kind of make a bounding box and bound around them all. I'm just going to click somewhere that's not on one of these points and drag my mouse. So if I click and drag, I get a bounding box. Now I can encompass those control points with the bounding box, let go of my mouse, and it activates all of those points. I can move up into the upper right corner, click the group button, and now I've grouped all of those points. So any adjustment I make to the main control point, sort of the master control point here, it's going to affect all of the control points in the group. All right, so I briefly showed you what was happening with the selection of that individual control point. Now what you'll note is we've got three control points that are grouped together. So if you follow me to the right side of the interface, we've got our group here instead of the individual control point. I'm going to go ahead and click on the checkbox, and we can get a sense of what the control point is affecting. And maybe we can change where the control point is selecting if we want to by adding some of those constrictive control points. One thing I want you to note, before I jump in and I kind of like try to really hone in the selections with these control point sliders, I'm sorry, with these control points, using this option, being able to view where the selection is being made, I will actually kind of just look at the before and after, because sometimes adjusting the sky like this, it might actually do something that's effective and useful in the building a little bit, or in some of these areas that are being subtly adjusted. And the reason why you might want to leave the adjustment in areas that maybe you didn't think you wanted to leave it in is because it will create a more photographic response. It'll respond a little bit more like light would, as opposed to cutting something out, which is more of a graphic design kind of procedure or aesthetic. So oftentimes the control points will actually be adjusting some areas that I didn't realize look better when the control points are doing that, in which case I just leave the effect on. So don't use this capability, this mask capability, as kind of the end all be all. It is nice and it's smart to be able to turn this on and to know where it is, but I actually don't end up using it as often. I probably show it to more people and use it more often in demos than I do when I'm actually utilizing control points on my own images. So it's nice, but I don't think it's necessary in most cases. All right, so I've got our three control points. I'm going to group this point. Let's actually add some structure and watch what happens when we add structure in here. There's this beautiful detail work, in the under area here. And by adding in this structure, it's bringing that texture out really nicely. If I bring it all the way up to 100, I think it's too far. But if we bring it up pretty high, and then maybe I take the brightness down a little bit and add a little bit of contrast, now I've got the texture that I want, but I have a nice density that's not going to be distracting from areas of the photograph. So I'm still able to kind of direct your attention through the image. I'm going to place a point in this area. Let's go ahead and just darken that down quite a bit. And now what we're getting is what's called a checkerboard effect, right? And that is, we have over here a really dark corner, and then we have a lighter area, and then we have a darker area, and then we have a lighter area. And creating these checkerboard effects, whether you've done it in camera using lighting and using, wherever you're standing and your exposure, which is ideal, do that first if possible, but being able to do this with selective post-processing like this using control points is going to help to be able to create more depth in an image, which therefore will help to direct the viewer's attention and will make the image look less two-dimensional, right? You're out in the field shooting, you're creating an image on a camera which ends up being two-dimensional. So by being able to control the light and color in this way, we're able to direct the viewer's attention, as we said before, but also we're able to kind of create a more three-dimensional looking photograph, one that's going to pop off of the screen or pop off of the page as we print it or whatever we're going to do with the photo in the long run. All right, so let's just take a quick look at this side by side. Again, I think your eye will probably be attracted towards the right side of the image, or the right side image. One reason why you might want to do this as well, look at the before and the after next to each other, is to kind of get a sense of where you haven't gone far enough, or if you've gone too far in certain areas. Like looking at these side by side, I think my sky's actually a little bit too blue right now, but I bet you if I actually go into the building and I start to increase the saturation a little bit, by increasing this saturation, the fact that the sky has maybe more saturation than it necessarily needed, it will be a little bit more believable, because now I've got more saturation in these areas that are high contrast, high color areas. Cool, neat. I'm coming up on time, I see that. I've got at least one more picture that I want to show you. So I'm going to go ahead and click the OK button in the lower right corner. We've talked about masks. We've talked about grouping control points. I think we've covered everything that we need to in the webinar, but I want to just go into this photo. Nope, that's not the one. This photo. This is an image by my friend David Turner. And the reason I wanted to go into it is A, it's a portrait. And we've only really looked at kind of landscape images so far. And then B, because there's some really unique color going on in this photograph. And that's because what David Turner has done. So David Turner is a fashion photographer. He worked for W Magazine for 20-something years. He worked with Ralph Lauren. So he shot so much Ralph Lauren stuff in the 90s. He used to get invited to his house to just discuss what they were going to do next photographically. Anyways, David is a fine art photographer now and commercial photographer still, but teaches at the Rochester Institute of Technology. This was an image that he shot in the main media workshops. So he teaches lighting for the main media workshops. And this technique is a really fun technique where you actually set the camera, you set your camera white balance to tungsten, and then you take a strobe light and you gel it. So you put a gel that's a tungsten colored gel on the image, or on the light source. And so what you get out of the image is this sort of blue subdued background, and then a basically corrected color temperature on the subject. In this case, I think he went a little bit crazy for aesthetic purposes. What I've done here is I've just gotten rid of the beauty dish that's in the upper right corner, the light source that's up there. And so now we'll go into Viveza 2. And what I want to do is kind of give the image a little bit more depth. So I'm going to tap F on my keyboard. And then I think what I want to do, you want to start globally. So if there are any major global adjustments you need to make, start with that stuff. I'm going to actually increase contrast just a little bit by utilizing a curve, and I'm going to make it a little more subtle than that. So that's pretty good. And then I'll start with control points because there isn't too much global stuff that I think I need to do. So I'm going to place a control point in the rock in the foreground because the foreground's going a little bit darker than we need it to in this case. He's purposely underexposed the background as well to kind of just subdue the background and to get more out of the lighting on our subject here. And so I'm going to place control points in these areas where I think we need to dodge just a touch. The structure is going to be very helpful here to kind of get a little bit more texture out of the rocks. And then let's just throw a couple control points in the sky. Let's darken down the sky. Let's add some structure. It's going to bring out the textures in the sky. And then I'm actually going to remove some blue. And I'm going to maybe, let's see what happens if we add a little bit of red. It should neutralize that just a touch. And by adding in our nice contrast, we're going to get that much more depth out of the image. Let's duplicate those points a little bit into the background. Place one there, place one here, size it. And then I've adjusted the background. I'm going to go ahead and actually desaturate our subject just a little bit. I think in the raw process, I probably could have done this. The image was pretty saturated right out of camera, and I probably could have cleaned that up a little bit in the raw processor, but I didn't do that. I think it's probably helpful for our demonstration, but it kind of seems otherworldly. So placing points in the areas where I want to direct your eye. So There's a lot of light drop off right here on her thigh, so I'm just going to brighten that up a little bit, just so that there's a little more direction. And then, you know what, let's see what happens if we place a control point on the rock, because those we're kind of fading right into black down there. You got to be careful. If I bring this all the way up to 100, it's going to look really funky, right? You never really can do that if something's like supposed to be black or very dark in camera. You can do quite a bit, as you see here, but I don't want to take it too far because it'll start to really look unnatural. But long story short, let's look at that before and after side by side. And I've made relatively subtle adjustments, but if you lean back in your chair, you'll note that the image on the right has a lot more oomph to it, a lot more direction, and I'm able to really push your eye as the viewer into the areas that we need them, right? Into this the whole subject itself. All right, so let's add a little structure, and I'm going to go ahead and call that the presentation. So Lori, I think I'm done here. Do we have any questions?
We do, actually. First question is, do you have an order in which you use the Nik plugins? For example, do you use Define first and then go to Viveza? Can you explain that?
Yep, great question. So if you access the software from Photoshop and you're accessing from the filter drop-down menu, this is going to be listed in alphabetical order. And same with Lightroom and Photolab. They're listed in alphabetical order. But if you look at the Nik Selective tool here, this is actually the suggested order in using the software in most situations. So if you need to do selective noise reduction or powerful noise reduction, you can use Define first, then go into editing your light and color with Viveza, and then you can go into perspective effects, and then move into HDR or color effects or analog, or convert from color to black and white with silver effects, and then finish your image using the output sharpener. Kind of the caveat to that is the raw pre-sharpener. If you want to use the raw pre-sharpener, what you would do is you would turn off the raw pre-sharpening that's occurring in your raw processor, and you would use this software first in your Nik software workflow. I don't find myself using this very often because the newest versions of Photolab, of Adobe Camera Raw and Lightroom and so on have really good sharpening right off the bat. The times when I do use this is if let's say I shoot a headshot portrait and I purposely blurred the background immensely, like a lot, shooting, I don't know, like 1.2 or something with an 85 mil and it's a headshot. Oftentimes I will use pre-sharpener because I can just selectively sharpen the subject's eyes, or maybe add a little to the subject's lips if my depth of field is very, very short, and then I don't sharpen the rest of the image. And that's the beauty of the pre-sharpener, is it's using control points, so you can put those in or not. But basically, the order that is suggested is from the top down here in the Nik Selective tool.
So several people were asking, once you've added some control points, how do you go back to global adjustments?
Oh, fine question. Yep, actually, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that one. So we'll jump into Viveza. When this opens like this, you've got three options for going full screen. You can either click the expand button, which would be slightly different on a PC. That would probably be over on the right, in the upper right corner of the interface. You can click the expand button on your Mac. You can actually move into the corner, in the lower right corner, expand this out. Or, and I literally just learned this, or maybe I just relearned it, if you tap F on your keyboard, it goes to full screen as well, which is quite a nice option. So if we're using control points, let's say I add in some structure and reduce saturation on the Taj Mahal here, and let's say we increase the contrast, and then I decide, okay, I actually want to go from our selective editing, see where it says selective on the right side, to global editing. Once again, all I have to do is deactivate my control points. And literally, that means you just click anywhere on the image that's not on a control point, and that's going to switch you back into global adjustments. That's a good question.
Okay, and I think for a few people that came in late, can you show how to duplicate control points?
Okay, so to duplicate control points, there's a number of ways to do that. So let's say we place a point in the sky. I find myself using duplicate control points in the sky all the time. That's why I keep using that as sort of the demo or the subject matter where we're doing this. So we'll make some adjustments. Let's actually shift the hue a little bit. Let's go this, no, let's not shift the hue. I decided on like that. Let's add blue. Let's add a little bit of cyan and say, okay, that's a nice color for the sky now. We want to have duplicate control points. There's numerous ways to do it. First of all, when your control point is active like this, you can move over to the right side of the interface and click the duplicate button that's underneath the control point list. So when you hit that, it basically will duplicate your point, and then you can drag this away. A couple more ways to do this. You can actually hold the Option key on your Mac or Alt if you're on a PC. While you're holding Option, you move to an active, or you move to a control point, doesn't have to be active, and you click on it and drag away. And that's another duplicated control point. You can click on a control point and hit Command C, Command V, so that's copy and paste. Now I've got a crosshair instead of just a sort of floating control point. So I place that. And then the other way that I couldn't remember earlier, but now I remember, is when you're on a control point, if you just hit Command D or Control D if you're on a PC, that's going to make a duplicated control point as well.
Okay, great. While you're there, can you repeat how to change the size of the control point? The slider?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
So the slider that controls the size of the area of influence is the one that's right next to the point itself, right? So all of the other control points have little color or little letters next to them, the labels, right? Brightness, contrast, saturation, structure. The size of the area of influence slider is the one that's next to, or if you kind of parallel to that point. So you can increase or decrease it. So if I slide the slider towards the control point, it's going to make it smaller. If I slide it away, it's typically going to make it larger. I think there's only one situation where it doesn't. No, it always is going to work that way. Towards the control point makes it smaller, away from the control point makes it larger. And you just watch the area as you're adjusting it.
Great. Dan, under the Hughes slider, there's an eyedropper tool. Can you explain how to use that?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, let me actually, I don't know if I have a photo that would be great for. Let's go to this one so I can show you the tool, and then I'll go back to this photo and see if we can make it work photographically. So I should have had a demo image for that. So underneath the list of sliders on the right side here, there's a little eyedropper tool, and there's a little color swatch there. And so if you use control points a lot, you can click the control point button, obviously. What color are we going to change? Let's see if we can change the red color. So I'm going to place the control point on our red circle. You can see, first of all, there's a little color swatch. So that's the exact color and tone that we've placed the point on. You even get an RGB readout. So right now it's saying R, red, 239, green, 0, blue, 28. If I were to click on the eyedropper tool, there's two things to show you here. If I click on the eyedropper tool and I go click on a different color in the image somewhere, what's going to happen is the sliders are going to adapt themselves to try to match that same color. So if I go click on the blue, it automatically goes and changes the color of the object, right? So that's pretty amazing because that's kind of a hard thing to do for the most part, match colors. And you're doing that using that eyedropper tool. So let's see if we can do that again. Let's place a control point on the star this time. And then let's see if we can turn the star green. It doesn't work every single time. I just kind of knew that that circle was going to work pretty well. So we click on the eyedropper tool. Our cursor turns into a little eyedropper. I click on our green, and yeah, it did a pretty good job. It's not perfect. I think if I expand this out and then maybe bring the brightness back up a little bit, it's pretty darn close, which is a pretty amazing thing to do. I don't find myself using it all the time, but it's pretty cool when you can. All right, so the other way to use that, I'm going to place the control point on this red again, and instead of using the eyedropper, we're actually going to click on the little color swatch here. When you click on the color swatch, your color picker is going to open up. If you're on a PC, this might actually look slightly different. And we can basically choose any color we want. So let's say we want it to be this sort of cyan color, sort of sky blue or coral, I guess. Let's click OK, and it basically adapts the sliders to fit those colors, which is pretty amazing, really. Let's see if we can do this photographically, though. because it works really well on these shapes like this. Sometimes, so where I find myself using it is on if I want to change the color of somebody's eyes, which can be really fun, or the color of a shirt, or let's say you're doing e-commerce stuff or selling things on eBay and you've got multiple objects or multiple colors that you're selling, you could actually easily change the color of the object that way. All right, let's see if we can change the color of the yellow portion of the building here, which may be blasphemous. I'm not sure exactly, so we probably should be careful here. So place the point. Let's go ahead and see if we can match it to one of the other colors that's in the image. So we're gonna use the eyedropper tool, and then let's click on, let's say, this tone and color, and it's gonna adjust. Now, what's happening is because this control point wants to make a photographic looking selection, what I might need to do is kind of hunt and peck, sort of find the area that looks best. And then the other thing I might need to do is duplicate the control point into a couple different areas. The problem that we're going to run into here is that the adjustments that are being made to these sliders are specific to the color and tone that you place the point on, and then the color and tone that you sample from. So because there are so many different colors and tones in the building here, it's hard to make this adjustment. So that's why if it's a t-shirt, or if it's the pupil of the eye, pupil, iris, what am I, yeah, it works pretty well. To change the entire color of the building, maybe not. But anyways, that's what you would do with that stuff. I need to bring in a couple images that would demo well for that, for a situation where you might actually do that. I didn't think of it.
Can you just show quickly how to group control points again?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
So if you want to group control points together, first you have to have, a couple control points to group. Let's do it on the side of the building this time. And let's increase the structure. And let's go ahead and just shift the color. So let's make this more red and add a little more contrast. And let's say we wanted those to be not only duplicates, but we wanted to group them because later on we might want to make further adjustments, because maybe it doesn't work really well on the entire area to have this exact set of adjustments. So here we've got our 4 control points. You know what I'm going to do too is I'm going to place another control point right here inside of that window. And I'm going to do that because last time I showed you how to group control points, I just took the bounding box, I just clicked and dragged around and I let go, right? But that activates any control point that's inside of the bounding box. So there are 2 things that I can do. I should be able to hold the shift key down and just click on the control point that I don't want. Maybe it's option, nope, and that's not working at all. So the other way of doing it is to actually click on a control point and then hold the shift key down on your keyboard. And now I can activate individual control points compared to activating, using the bounding box. So that way we're missing this middle control point. And now we move into the upper right corner and tap the group button, or hit Command G on a Mac or Control G on a PC. And that's going to group those points together. So now any adjustments I make to the master control point or whatever control point I click on, because you can actually switch it, any control point that you click on that's within the group is going to affect all of the control point sliders in all of the groups there.
Great. Dan, there's 2 more questions if you have time.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, real quickly, if you could just show the loop tool or the histogram at the very bottom of Viveza 2. Yep. People were asking about that, just to kind of show them.
Yep, so the histogram in Viveza 2 sits within the levels and curves adjustments. So if you make adjustments to this stuff, you're going to be able to see your level or your histogram itself. In the very far lower corner, you have a loop function, and that loop function is actually going to follow your cursor around as you're moving over the image area. Or there's a little pin tool in the lower right corner. If you tap on the pin tool, you can actually tap on like an area that you don't want the loop to shift off of. So I'll click on maybe here. So now when I move my cursor around, I'm not moving my loop around. So if there's an area of interest that you want to keep an eye on all the time, you can do that. And it also has a split preview on it. So you can actually sort of move that left and right. And again, on the left, just like the major or the main split preview option, on the left, the original, and then on the right of that red line is the enhanced area.
Okay, one last question. If you could kind of quickly show how to use the brush tool. Lots of people are asking about that.
Sure. So I'm going to show you on this image. I don't think that this is an image where I would necessarily use it personally, because generally in an image like this, I'm able to kind of put the control points exactly where I want them to be, and I can make the adjustment wherever I need it to be. Sometimes, though, the control points don't do everything or exactly what I need them to do in the long run, or I might just go in and selectively adjust something in here with the control points and then click the brush button. But one of the beauties of the brush key, let's go ahead and tap it. So I've made some adjustments on the image. We tap the brush button in the lower right corner. That's going to bring us back over into Photoshop. And then your Nik Selective tool is going to shift from having the list of the different controls, or sorry, different pieces of software, to having the controls over the brush capability. So let's center this for just a second. Right now, with the paintbrush on, if I go over the image and I start just brushing, I can put the effect wherever we want. So basically what we've got here is the ability to use the control points while we're inside of the Nik interface, and then we have the ability to use the brush capability that's in Photoshop. And what you'll notice as I brush the effect into the bottom part of the image, on the right side here in our layers palette, you'll note now I have the layer mask has the top area that's black, which means we're not applying any of this Viveza adjustment. And then the bottom area, which is now white, is where the effect is being applied, right? And here's how you use this. So in the Nik Selective tool, brush allows you to paint the effect in. The eraser tool allows you to erase the effect out. You can fill the effect on the entire image, or you can erase the effect on the entire image. And what you'll notice on the right side, and this is a good way to get to know layer masks in Photoshop, is as I click on the clear button, the trash can button, now my entire layer mask on the right side is black. If I click on the fill button, it turns the entire layer on, if you will. So all of the adjustments we made within Viveza are visible. And then because we filled it, we could click the erase button and then just go into the areas where we wanted to erase the effect out and get rid of it. And then when we're done, when we've finished applying the effect, brushing the effect in where we want it and erasing it where we don't, we click the apply button. And that's how you'd utilize the brush capability.
Excellent. Okay. Dan, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Everyone, thank you for joining us today. All right, Dan, I'll let you go ahead and close us out.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lori. Thank you all very much for coming out and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.